The sun was dipping low, setting the sky ablaze in warm streaks of orange and pink as Clara made her way up the dirt path toward the ranch house. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, and she adjusted the bundle tucked neatly beneath her arm, her apron, carefully folded, as if that small detail alone would convince the rancher she was the dependable sort. She had been hired with one simple task in mind: to bake bread. Ranch hands needed feeding, and Luke Montgomery, the widowed rancher, had neither the time nor the patience to keep a kitchen running. Clara had answered his notice pinned up at the mercantile, and now here she was, heart beating faster than she liked to admit. The house itself was grand in its rugged way, all solid beams and wide porches, built to withstand storms and the weight of years. The scent of horses and hay drifted from the nearby barn, but inside, as Luke ushered her toward the kitchen, it was quiet, too quiet. Clara noticed it right away, the absence of chatter, the kind of stillness that felt lonely. She tried to keep her expression polite as she set her things down, but she wondered if this place had once held more laughter, more life. The kitchen was warm, though not from use. It smelled faintly of dust and wood smoke, not yeast and sugar. Clara rolled up her sleeves, set out flour, and began the familiar rhythm of mixing and kneading, her hands working with confidence born from years of practice. She let herself sink into it, the push and fold, the soft resistance of dough beneath her palms. It was a comforting ritual, one that made her feel at home no matter where she was. But she wasn't alone. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement near the doorway. A small figure peeked around the frame, a little girl with wide hazel eyes and tangled hair falling around her face. She looked no older than 6 or 7. Clara pretended not to notice at first, giving the child space, but she couldn't help the tug in her chest at the sight of her. "You can come in," Clara said gently, not looking up from the dough. The girl hesitated, then shuffled a little farther into the room, bare feet scuffing against the wood floor. She didn't speak. She just stared with a mixture of shyness and curiosity, her gaze fixed on the way Clara's hands moved. "Do you like bread?" Clara asked, her voice light. The girl gave the tiniest nod. "Well, that's good," Clara smiled, finally meeting her eyes. "Because I could use a helper, and I think you'd be perfect for the job." The girl's lips parted in surprise, as if no one had ever asked her that before. Clara reached for a smaller ball of dough, plucked it from the larger mound, and rolled it into her hands until it was smooth. Then she held it out. "Here, want to try?" The girl's small fingers reached out, tentative, and took the dough. She stared at it like it was something precious, then looked back up at Clara as though waiting for instructions. "We're going to braid it," Clara explained. She divided her own dough into 3 ropes, laying them side by side on the floured counter. "Like hair. Over, under, over. See." The child clumsily copied her, the ropes of dough slipping and sticking, but she laughed, a soft, bubbling sound that seemed almost foreign to her, as though she hadn't used it in a long time. Clara's heart swelled at the sound. Behind them, Luke stood in the shadow of the doorway, silent. He had only meant to check that the new hire was settling in, but he found himself frozen, watching the scene unfold. His daughter, Emma, had hardly spoken to strangers since her mother died. She had withdrawn, slipping further into silence with each passing month. And now here she was, shoulders relaxed, a shy grin tugging at her mouth, her hands busy with dough as flour dusted her hair. Luke's chest tightened, a strange mixture of grief and gratitude rising within him. He hadn't expected this. He had hired Clara to fill an empty space in the kitchen, but somehow, she was filling an emptiness he hadn't known how to fix. Clara brushed a strand of hair from her face, smearing a streak of flour across her cheek, and chuckled when Emma proudly held up her crooked braid. "Perfect," she praised, though it leaned heavily to one side. "You're a natural." Emma's eyes lit up. No one had called her that in a long time. Clara slid the braid onto a pan and covered it with a towel to rise. Then, lowering her voice conspiratorially, she leaned closer to the girl. "You know what makes bread taste the best?" Emma shook her head, curious. "Love," Clara whispered with a grin. "You have to put kindness in with the flour. That's what makes it soft." Emma giggled, covering her mouth with her hands. It was a small sound, but to Luke, it was everything. He stepped away quietly, not wanting to interrupt, though his mind lingered on the moment long after he returned to his work outside. The ranch had felt cold for so long, filled with the echoes of what he'd lost. But tonight, as the scent of fresh bread began to drift through the house and his daughter's laughter followed close behind, it felt as though something long buried had stirred to life again. And it had started with nothing more than a woman kneading dough, and the kindness she carried in her hands. The days began to flow into weeks, and the ranch seemed to change in ways Luke could hardly explain. The bread Clara baked each morning filled the house with warmth that reached beyond the kitchen walls, seeping into corners that had long felt empty. But it wasn't the loaves, golden and soft, that made the difference. It was Clara herself, and the way she carried her kindness like sunlight. Emma followed her everywhere now. In the mornings, Clara would set the child on a stool beside her, giving her little jobs, rolling rolls, sprinkling sugar, brushing butter over crusts. Emma's laughter returned, hesitant at first, but each day stronger. She asked questions, told little stories, and even sang softly while kneading dough, her small voice fluttering through the room like birdsong. Luke, passing through on his way to the barn, would pause without meaning to, leaning against the doorframe just to listen. He told himself it was nothing, but he knew better. Clara never treated Emma as fragile, never tiptoed around her grief. Instead, she met the girl exactly where she was. When Emma scraped her knee one afternoon while racing through the pasture, Clara didn't fuss. She crouched down, wiped away the blood with calm hands, and said, "A scar is proof you were brave." Emma puffed up with pride, repeating those words to herself for days afterward. At night, Clara sat with her by the fire. She read books in a gentle voice, sometimes letting Emma sound out the words, other times simply rocking with her until her eyelids drooped. Once, Luke came in from the barn late and found his daughter curled against Clara's shoulder, fast asleep, her thumb caught between her lips. Clara didn't move, didn't dare wake her. She simply looked up at Luke with a softness in her eyes that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Luke had been a man of silence since his wife passed, burying his grief beneath work. He had learned to keep his words short, his emotions shorter. But Clara's presence was like a steady hand on a wound he had forgotten how to tend. She filled the air with warmth and gentleness, and though he tried to resist it, Luke felt himself being pulled into her orbit. One evening, the three of them sat on the porch as the sun sank low, painting the horizon in swirls of rose and gold. Emma leaned into Clara's side, her tiny hand wrapped trustingly around Clara's fingers. Luke sat across from them, his hat tilted low, pretending to be absorbed in the last sip of his coffee. But his eyes kept drifting toward them, drawn to the way Emma's face glowed with contentment, the way Clara's laughter blended so seamlessly with his daughter's. Emma suddenly piped up, breaking the quiet. "Miss Clara, do you think stars are holes poked in the sky?" Clara tilted her head back, gazing at the faint specks just beginning to appear. "I think they might be windows," she said thoughtfully. "So the people we've loved and lost can peek through and watch over us." Emma grew quiet, her little brow furrowed. She glanced up at Luke, and though he said nothing, his throat tightened. He hadn't known how to explain heaven to his daughter, how to put words to the ache of missing her mother. And yet here was Clara, giving Emma something tender to hold onto without making the weight heavier. Emma snuggled closer to Clara, whispering, "Then Mama can see us." Clara kissed the top of her hair. "I believe she can." Luke set his cup down and looked away, his eyes burning. He had never expected this, never expected that the woman he hired for bread would heal a part of his daughter he himself could not reach. And more startling still, she was reaching him, too. Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Luke lingered on the porch. Clara came out to join him, her apron dusted with flour even at this late hour. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of hay and earth, and above them, the stars burned steady and bright. "You've done more than you know," Luke said quietly, staring out at the dark fields. Clara tilted her head. "What do you mean, my little girl?" he replied, his voice rough. "She hasn't laughed like that in a long time. Not since." He stopped, the words catching, but Clara didn't push him. She only waited, patient as always. Finally, he turned to look at her. The moonlight softened her features, but her eyes held that steady warmth he had come to depend on. He reached into his pocket, his hand closing around something small and solid he had carried all day. He hadn't meant to do this so soon, hadn't planned to, but the truth weighed on him like a stone. With a breath, he dropped to one knee before her. Clara gasped softly, her flour-dusted hands flying to her mouth. "Clara," Luke said, his voice steady despite the thunder in his chest, "I thought I hired you for bread. But you've given me and Emma so much more. You've filled this house with life again. You've shown my daughter kindness I couldn't put into words. And somewhere along the way, you gave me hope I thought I'd buried forever." He opened the small velvet box, revealing the simple silver ring inside. It wasn't grand, but it carried all the weight of his heart. "I don't want to let you go. Will you stay, not just for the bread, but for us?" Clara's eyes shimmered with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. For a long moment, she said nothing, only pressed her hands to her chest as though steadying her racing heart. Then Emma's voice broke the silence. The little girl had crept back to the porch, her nightgown trailing, her eyes wide with excitement. "Say yes, Miss Clara," Emma whispered, her voice full of hope. Clara let out a soft laugh through her tears and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll stay." Luke slid the ring onto her finger, his calloused hands trembling as they touched hers. Emma squealed with joy, throwing her arms around Clara's waist, and Clara bent to scoop her up, holding her close. Luke stood, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, a certainty, a peace, and a love he thought he'd lost forever. The stars glimmered above them, the windows of heaven open wide, and for the first time since grief had stolen the light from his home, Luke felt whole again. And it had begun, simply, with the kindness of a woman who baked bread.